On the one hand, I think there's sort of two phenomenon going on at the same time that are worth disentangling. One of them is an authentic desire from millennials and Zoomers disproportionately, and more radical left Gen Xers and Boomers that want to censor their political opponents. They want to prevent their political opponents from running for office. They want to put their political enemies in prison. They want to censor their political enemies. They want to deplatform their political enemies. That seems to be coming from that cancel culture. Like, it feels organic in the sense that it's a kind of intolerance and a kind of entitlement. I shouldn't have to hear this. This is these different views. I shouldn't have to hear them. That seems there's an authentic part of that. And then I think there's an inorganic part of it that's coming from the censorship industrial complex of government agencies, NGOs with funding from the government and maybe run by people in the government or formerly in the government, and big philanthropy that is saying censorship is going to result in hate crimes, dictatorship, and all sorts of other social ills, and therefore we have to censor. And so you see this increase. I always cite this crazy increase of Democrats who want the government to censor misinformation online, going from 40% in 2018 to 70% in 2023. That's such a huge increase. It's too big of an increase over too short of a time to be explained by that slow generational change, from Gen Xers and maybe Boomers who had a more support for free speech to millennials and Zoomers. Clearly, it was media driven. Reminds me, I don't know if you've ever seen those Zach Goldberg for Manhattan Institute and for Tablet. He did those things showing how the increase of like white supremacy in the media, like all these racialized terms in the media, just skyrockets after 2015. You kind of go, there was a clear top-down media propaganda effort, really starting with 2015 in some ways, with like Ferguson. I guess was Ferguson 2015, and then all the way through to 2020. There's a top-down effort to make race, to have this really divisive conversation on race that I think was top-down, but there was also that bottoms-up part. Is kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, and that's what the EU is doing right now. That's what the UK is doing right now. They're essentially using, the riots and the violence and the stuff that's going on in the UK, and more broadly, these anti-immigrant, far-right figures and groups that, it's such a danger that we need to censor. These narratives, we're seeing these narratives in Canada too, which is quite funny because there's no violence happening in Canada. But still, according to the Canadian government's version of like terrorist watch, according to the Liberal Party, according to like CSIS, there's this terrorist threat coming from far groups that include people like me, theoretically, these this would be their language, these anti-gender groups, but also these anti-immigrant groups, these people who are, I guess against, there are real problems with immigration. That's like a real issue, and that's a genuine and fair, really genuine and fair concern for countries like Canada and the US and Europe. Obviously, there's big problems because of immigration in the EU in particular. But yeah, it's all the same narratives, and we have to censor and maybe jail people in order to preserve democracy.
Yeah. I find it scary when the stuff I find scary. I do find the criminal investigation of me scary because that was a reaction to this. But it's like when they start, like, I was also put on some Canadian blacklist of whatever dangerous intellectuals or something, and like it's creepy. Like you sort of see university professors, NGOs. They outreach to the media do hit pieces on you. They change your Wikipedia. They the next step. So they have all these, and then we discovered the handbook. Like there is a handbook. AMIT is what it's called. AMITT. We wrote about it with that same initial British Ministry of Defense, U.S. Defense thing. But they just little by little, they just keep adding steps. The next thing you know, they're going to try to get me they're going to make it so Stripe won't take my money, or won't take, they won't process your payments, or they're going to make Citibank, cut me off or something. And you just go, you can see where it's going. And I don't think like it's overly paranoid, and they call it, conspiracy theories, but you kind of go, yeah, it looks definitely like they want to control your banking. They want to control banking. They want to control, they want all the information on you wherever you travel. They want to control the information environment. I don't know how you look at that and don't call it totalitarianism. When we were Eastern Europe, we'd meet with some people in Czech Republic, and they'd be like, "Oh, for us, totalitarianism is this particular thing with the Soviet tanks and blah, blah, blah." It's like, okay, that's fine. But now it is still totalitarianism. If you're trying to control every aspect of life, like a Black Mirror episode, your banking, information, travel, like that is a totalitarian society. Don't tell me it's not. And then you have a lot of the persecution of the minorities, of the ideological minorities in this society, those that disagree, that dissent, a lot of desire. That's the scariest part, is the desire by the majority to make the minority dissidents suffer and pay a price for their heresies. It's ugly totalitarian stuff. Not much more different from past totalitarian movements. And certainly, you look at it, you go, wow, it actually is right out of 1984. This actually is the kind of stuff that George Orwell talked about.
Yeah, and I always tell people to reread 1984 because it's like a manual. It's like they literally plucked these strategies and tactics and general creepiness right out of 1984, and they're doing it with a straight face now, and apparently millions of people don't even notice.